If we now bring all of this understanding to us and use it, when we communicate as managers, we are either senders or we are receivers, as we have studied until now. We also, as managers, have to understand our own linguistic styles and also linguistic styles of people that we communicate with. And we have to understand body language. So having that background understanding of the process of communication, what would effective communication then be? Especially from a managerial standpoint. Now, effective communication happens when all parties are engaged in uncovering and understanding the meaning behind the words. Again, the emphasis is on being understood. It's not about the words, it's about what they mean and what they mean by the receiver. The 7 pillars of effective communication for managers then would be that your communication, what you're trying to transmit to another person or group, has to be clear, has to be concise, has to be objective, which means that it should be based on facts, it should be based on data, it should be based on actual events. It should not have subjectivity in it where you're using a lot of your own opinion or your subjective ideology into your communication process. It should be consistent, which means that every time you communicate, either it's about something at that issue or project, it has to be consistent. Your information has to be the same every time unless something has changed. It has to be complete. One of the things that can lead to disengagement in your team members is that you do not provide complete information to them, and their work gets affected because they don't have that complete information. Your communication has to be relevant. And also, when you communicate to someone, you have to have a keen understanding of their ability to understand, which would then impact what you communicate. Say, for example, you're talking to a 5-year-old, or you're explaining the process of how planes fly to a 5-year-old and a 25-year-old, and you're a pilot. Now, obviously, a 5-year-old would not know much about planes. 25-year-old perhaps flown a few times, seen the airports, may have done some reading, may know a little bit of physics. The understanding will be different. So the way you communicate and will depend upon your audience's knowledge and their ability and their intellectual faculties to understand what you're trying to communicate. So you will modulate your communication in a way so that you take that into consideration. Now, one of the examples that is used very commonly, and perhaps you've been exposed to it as well, is the tree swing example. It's self-explanatory because, as you can see here, we take it for granted, really, but it should not be, because every step of the process. Now here it's very simple, but considering modern workplaces where we, for example, may be a part of a manufacturing unit, or we may be in a company that is dealing with healthcare or with information technology and so on and so forth, every step of the process is very critical. And if communication is not performed properly, it will have an impact. It will not transmit the information correctly. And here, as you can see, what the customer wanted is something that was never actually fully understood within the organization, either by the architect or by the project person, by the project sponsor, or even the production team, because the messages just got lost. Because when we hopped from one person or one group to another, communication did not happen properly. So what I have here is an example to show this process to you in actual what happens. Watch this video, and this will actually give you an explanation for the tree swing example and why communicating effectively is important, because as organizations, messages and information crosses multiple people, multiple groups. And if we do not communicate properly and decode properly and then encode the message properly to transmit it to the next receiver, the messages can get changed substantially and may mean something completely different. This can have impact on production, this can have impact on client satisfaction, this can have impact on quality, this can have impact on productivity, and so on and so forth. So for a good organization that is well run, has good communication practices. So let's go to this video and watch it. It is a few minutes long, so I may or may not stay on screen, but I hope you enjoy it.
Не можеш го два пъти.
All right, so the message is clear. The video is 7 minutes long, so you can watch it in your PowerPoint presentation that is provided along in the learning management system. So you saw how easily the information that is transmitted from one person to the other, even within such a very short period of time, in apparently educated and professional people, is subject to such high risk of distortion very, very easily and very quickly. And imagine what can happen in organizations over time, over larger groups, over different countries and different cultures, where people are not even in one room like this, and information is getting transmitted over emails and over days and months. It's a good example to demonstrate how communication is is subject to such high risk for distortion. Now, if we go to our next slide, which is we really have to understand our business audience. Who's the primary audience? The primary audience is the audience that your communication is intended for. So if you send an email to someone or a group of people, they are your primary audience. Then what's a secondary audience? Secondary audience is a group of people that really aren't the real stakeholders in your communications. You're not as concerned about this group. They may or may not get your message, but what your focus should be is that your primary audience is the one that should get your communication, should be able to decode it appropriately. Now, as we mentioned before in the previous slides, the understanding of the audience, their skills at the language or their cultural backgrounds, their understanding of the depth of the topic and their intellectual faculty, their intellectual their educational background and their experience on the job, for example, all of these will have an impact on their understanding of the message. And one of the important influencing factors that we have talked about until now is perception, stereotypes, and biases. I'll have you go through these slides when you go through the course material, and we have spoken about these in the past. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but consider that there are influencing factors that are primarily within the psychological noise that we talked about in the first few slides, will have an impact on your communication. You see, stereotypes, we stereotype every day without even thinking about it. And I would encourage you to pause this slide and go through some of these that are on your slide. It's so important because we do it unknowingly. And some of it is because we have grown in an environment where we have been exposed to information that has over time constructed our perceptions and our stereotypes. And now when we experience certain kinds of visuals, or we are exposed to a certain event, we utilize this background to interpret our communication, and we use stereotypes. One of the things that we really as managers need to stay away from is to form stereotypes. And the higher we go in an organization, the more and more is the responsibility of the leaders and the managers to enforce programs in the organization that are deliberately decreasing and eliminating stereotypes, because this can impact communication, but this can also impact diversity, this can impact performance, it's going to impact engagement, and so on and so forth. So it is again a very deliberate thing, because psychologically, having been exposed to certain ways to see things right from our childhood, we tend to see what we want to see, and we need to be more deliberate and be more factual and be more objective about things than utilize our perceptions or biases or preconceived notions or our stereotypes to define our environment and to define our audience, because that would then impact our ability to communicate with them. In organizations, information flows in different ways. Again, as a manager, you have to have a keen understanding of how information flows in an organization. It can flow through what is called formal channels, which is people who have been stipulated to talk to each other as a part of their responsibility. So if you're a manager, you need to speak with your subordinates. If you're a leader, you need to speak with people in the organization. And then so information has to come through these formal channels, especially about work. It's about the business of the organization. It flows through this formal channel. But there's a lot of informal communication that's going on in the organization where people talk to anybody in the organization. It could be you made friends in a different department and now the two of you are talking about what's going on in each other's departments. Or it could be a CEO talking to a frontline staff, say for example at lunch. The CEO got out of the room, picked up the first person he or she saw in the corridor and say, let's go for lunch. And that's informal communication, because now the CEO is not utilizing his or her direct line of reports to get information for him or her to assess what's going on in the organization. Organizations use different kinds of structures to ensure that information is flowing in a way so that it's getting passed. It's not getting blocked anywhere. Communication is seamless. The ones, and we call this a network, because when information flows in different ways, it is basically a network of information flow that is throughout the organization. In this network, there are pathways. They can be vertical, which means all the way from frontline staff all the way to the CEO. So it's hopping from different levels of the organization. Or it's sideways. It could be, say, in between two departments or between two managers who are at the same level. So that's lateral, that's sideways. And from the types of network standpoint, if you look at this slide, we'll come to it again. The wheel network is an information flows in this network to and from one central one central member. So you can see the one that's on the top left, which is the wheel network. So as you can understand, there is not much interaction between the people who would be in those yellow or orange blocks. They only communicate with the person who is in the red block. So wheel network doesn't have much interaction going on between people. Similarly, for chain network, as you can see, there is a sequential communication. The green, as you can see on the left side of the slide, is a chain network. Again, people can only communicate to people who are next to them, either below or above. So, and for the first person at the top, they can only communicate with the person below, and for the last person in the chain, they can only communicate with the person above. Again, not a very efficient way of communication where the network doesn't have a lot of interaction going on. The other one that we will discuss is circle network. Now, in a circle network, members can communicate with others close to them. As you can see here, the blue 5 blocks in a circle network, they can actually talk to each other, and it's a closed loop. So whatever information one block has will pass on to the other blocks. That does not happen in the green sequential channel, where the information, say for example, can get stopped at one of the steps. Okay, so again, because information is only flowing in one direction, especially for the ones at the top and below. But in the circle network, as you can see, the likelihood of information crossing over to others is higher. Then you can go into all channel network, which means the networks found in teams with very high levels of communication. The example that you have on this slide is the fourth one on the left side, where you now have blocks of different color and they have all the different connections with each other. Now this is a highly cohesive team kind of network where communication is flowing easily from one person to the other. Now, usually this happens in teams that are empowered, where the leader or the project manager or the team leader or somebody is not anxious that all the information should go through him or her. The team has been designed and has been trained and has been configured in a way so that the centrality of the team leader or the project leader or the company head or the CEO, however you want to look at it, has not been made important. What is more important is that information is important. It flows easily from one stakeholder to the other. So again, one of the other important things that we will discuss is an organizational chart. And why organizational chart is important is because it is one of the basic ways an organization can represent its formal communication network. So it's something that you put on paper. It's something you can present in an electronic format to your staff or to people outside the organization, where now a formal reporting setup is established through which communication will flow. If the CEO has to send information, he will send to his top team. The top team will then send it to their next level managers. And based upon the number of levels in an organization, it will keep coming down and go all the way to the frontline staff. It can go into different functional areas, it can go into different countries, different country operations, and so on and so forth. So this is what an organizational chart's objective is to demonstrate at one place a formal network in the organization through which information flows. Information flows vertically, which is it can flow up and down. That means information can go all the way from down to up as well. And between people, for example, horizontally, say for example people in the same level or in the same staff or in the same team or reporting to the same manager will have the same information from that manager. So there is some lateral communication channels in the organizational chart. Another thing that's not on the slide is that some organizations are highly matrixed, which means that one person could even report to more than one manager, and people from different functional areas could be working together with one manager in a certain department. So there's not a simple way to communicate, and the organizational chart that is on your slide has some matrix inbuilt in it with dotted line reporting. There's a lot of informal communication, as you can see, what is many times referred to as the grapevine in organizations. And as you can see, the dotted lines here could form the informal pathways or the grapevine. Now, what are the barriers to effective communication for managers? Because we've gone through so much matter and we've looked at all the important aspects of effective communication. So why does effective communication not happen all the time in organizations then? If we know that it is so important, if we know how to do it, then why is it something that we still want to learn about and something that organizations spend a lot of time, effort, and money to ensure that it happens? It is because, the first and foremost is because communication is for people, and people are people at the end of the day, and they are different, and they have their own perceptions, and they come to the work and the office or to their organization as very different individuals who come from different cultural backgrounds, different upbringing, their knowledge level, their experience level, their emotional well-being, their psychological state, their body language, their knowledge of body language, their training as effective communicators, the use of technology. One manager or one individual may use technology more than the other. the choice of words, for example, semantics. And it is very hard for an organization to standardize. And perhaps standardization is not what we should seek, because then it would make it very boring and monotonous, isn't it? And that's also what we don't want. What we want is a very effective environment where communications is happening while keeping the diversity of individuals and individual variations, to keep it exciting, to keep it interesting. So to overcome these barriers of communication for managers, one of the first things that managers have to do is to be aware. If you're aware, 75% of the job is done. The rest is then, if you're aware, then you'll do something about it. Now, what can you impact? What you can impact is the clarity of the messages. You can impact the completeness of the messages. You can impact the how difficult or easy your messages are to decode, whether they are your written communication or whether they are non-verbal communication, or their spoken language, which forms under verbal communication. So you're using the right medium. You're using email for something that email is for, and you're speaking with people or using, say, for example, a teleconference or a telephone appropriately. You try as much as possible to get feedback and to ensure that your receiver interpreted or decoded the message as you would have intended to. So that's something that it's your responsibility as a sender, especially as a manager who is now a sender, to ensure that the receiver is interpreting the message for your point to go across. So these are the more important ones. You can go through the rest of them at your leisure, but these are something that I really wanted to impress upon on that slide. Now, as a manager, when you are sending any form of communication using any form of medium, be very clear and be very complete. If you do not prepare to be clear and complete, then there is a likelihood that you may not be clear and may not be complete. So practice and have a mentor or have someone see you communicate, or have someone read your email and give you feedback, because that's the only way that you can actually enhance and get feedback from your receivers. Many of the when you write emails, people use short forms, and they sometimes forget that short forms may not be completely understood or even appreciated by the receiver. Even if, for example, if someone sends me an email and it has a lot of words shortened, just for sake of maybe using less words, or maybe it's more of a casual conversation, and the sender has decided to use acronyms and shorten some of the words in a casual way. Now, either I may not fully understand those words, or if I still understood them, I may get influenced that this is a very casual message, while perhaps it was not, and that could influence my interpretation of the message. So use of such language is also something that is that should be thought about before utilization. It is important to also make sure that when disclosure of certain information needs to be made, it needs to be made completely, unless there are reasons for not doing so, because withholding information could tantamount to distortion. And especially when it comes to performance of people, performance of teams, or client-related issues, or any other such, or compliances to local regulations, etc. Holding back information can basically mean that the communication was not complete, and could resort to distortion, which can impact the ability of the company to to fully respond to whatever the risk is. So this is something that managers need to be no matter how much discomfort there is, or sometimes embarrassment, because it might be something that is something that something went wrong, and there might be need for retraining, or there might be need for changing the process, for example. But sometimes managers take it too personally, while there's nothing personal. So as a manager, you need to detach your subjective and emotional connections with your work and use a very objective assessment of what needs to be communicated. And when you overcome it, you will become a better manager. If you're a receiver and you're a manager, make sure that you pay attention to a message that is coming to you. If you are a primary audience for a certain piece of communication that's coming to you either in verbal or non-verbal way, pay attention to it, because the person who sent it has to tell you something. So it's important that you give it its own amount of attention. In personal meetings, whether it be a one-to-one or in a group environment or in a teleconference, listening is a very important skill in communication. Do not force yourself to speak, and listen as much as possible, and speak only when you have given the other person or the other people enough opportunity to present what they want to communicate. It's important to clarify and confirm, repeat and confirm, so that you ensure that what you're hearing or what you're reading is exactly how you're interpreting it. And make sure that you also have the cultural backgrounds in mind. So if you get an email, if you're someone from US and you get an email from someone in Japan, now there could be, if you're aware that this email is coming from Japan, and if you've done some preparation, then you would be ready for any kind of semantics or any kind of language or any kind of tone in that email that you would then take into consideration. One example I have from my experience, and I know people who've worked in these cultures, is that, for example, in the Western work environment, we're very direct. We'll write an email and we may not even have anything on top of the email saying dear XYZ or hi XYZ. We might just go straight to the topic and then just put our name under it, or not even put our name at all, because we're focusing more on getting the message across. It works fine between two people working in the same office, say for example in New York or in, say, Los Angeles. But now if you're sending an email, I'll use the Japanese example again. If you're sending the same email without a salutation, without a regards, without putting your name, and you just send the body of the email to someone in Japan, it would perhaps be perceived as harsh, or it could be perceived as extremely direct and without much respect, because respect and tone of the messages is extremely important in Japanese culture. It is as important as the message itself. So if you're writing an email to someone in Japan, you need to ensure that you utilize those things in your email to ensure that you're getting your message across, because otherwise the person who is receiving your message may perceive you differently, and that will, or your message differently, and that can have a negative impact on what you're trying to communicate. So again, I don't have to spend too much time on this slide, but what we've been trying to say is that whether you're a communicator, whether you're trying to send or receive, we have these perceptual screens around us. They're based on our culture, they're based on our education, they're based upon our families, they're based upon our upbringing, they're based upon our experiences, they're based upon our work experiences, and they're based upon our perceptions, our stereotypes, and so on and so forth. And they influence the quality of the communication. They influence clarity, and even age. If you're communicating with someone who is a Gen X or Gen Z, or you're communicating with someone who's been in the organization for 45 years, then you have to take that into consideration. If you don't take that into consideration, you're going to not be able to penetrate that perceptual screen. So as an effective manager, when you communicate, you are not just communicating for the sake of just getting things across. You are using communication as a very powerful tool to engage the people around you and to get the best out of them, because your communication is so good. So that's at the core of it, is that you as a manager, your responsibility is to enhance your work culture, enhance productivity, enhance quality, and ensure that that the company's goals are met. And if you believe, and we know that communication is extremely important for that, then you're really utilizing communication to achieve those goals as the responsibility that it's been given to you as your role in the organization. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is reflective listening, which is the skill of listening carefully to any other person who is wishing to pass any information to you, and then repeating it back to the speaker. This is something that you should practice again at work, or even with your friends, or even with your family members, is to say the same thing back and to let the sender of the message hear it. Or if it's an email, that they read it and they confirm that what you understand is what they meant. So this is reflective listening. Utilize it as much as possible in your work every day, in your meetings, in your casual conversations with your colleagues, with your subordinates, with your manager. Repeat and confirm your understanding of what you heard or what you read. So reflective listening ensures that the communication has passed correctly from one person to the other. I won't spend much time on this slide. Please go through it when you're going through the PowerPoint presentation. But these are the 5 keys to effective supervisory communication or managerial communication. Now, what are the next? This brings us to the end of this this lecture. The next steps would be that there is a case study that you have to go through, and it has an assignment attached to it that you need to complete. There might be one or more case studies in the resources section that I highly recommend you to go through, which will further enhance your understanding of an impact of communication in organizations. As usual, this unit also has a multiple choice questions quiz or test that needs to be passed. I highly recommend that my students go through the additional material. At times, the additional materials can be a lot. So if you want to prioritize, it's based upon your interest. I would leave that to you. But if you need help, just contact me, and I'll try to help to maybe prioritize it for you a little bit based upon your interest. We can have a chat. But go through the additional material, because lecture itself with the slides may not be enough to just keep moving to the next stage. While this is an accelerated course, utilize as much as time that you have to go through the additional material. Utilize your work environment, your colleagues, your feedback from your colleagues and other people around you, and utilize what you've learned from this presentation, this slide, these slides, and this unit overall after going through the supplemental readings. that you fully understand or understand to a large extent the role of communication in organizations and how it can either positively or negatively impact the performance of the organization. So that was the end of this lecture. It's lecture number 4. We still have quite a few lectures to go through. I'm really looking forward to coming back with the next lecture. Meanwhile, as I always say, I am available. Contact me in the learning management system for anything that you need help with for your studies.